right, reintegration. Okay, so reintegration comes in a few ways. A lot of times, what prevents reintegration for these people that suffer from these type of problems is that the reintegration process means to educate them up. It means to break what they're fearful of. It means to break what they're intimidated by. It also means to deprogram the psychops that reinforce in ways. There's like 8 keywords that if you were to say that, specific 8 keywords, those are memory triggers to essentially events. But it also comes with a series of psychops that take them to that event, and that a lot of times what prevents the reintegration aspects to the people that suffer from this type of severance type of issue is the lack of people deprogramming the psychops that actually feed into pulling the memory out in ways. And so the reality is just like essentially these people. Okay, so in the America Ultra, the redheaded chick just walks up to the dude at the convenience store, and she essentially does this, right? But see, that like wakes them up, but then there's certain stuff that goes along with needing to be deprogrammed of. That a lot of times the memory triggers also activate a memory of the psychop that has to be broken down to essentially achieve this. You see, this type of stuff in S&Ms, which they do this stuff, the memories they were to say like this word, and then that would potentially activate a memory and a belief in a psychop that then would have them doing something, based on the psychop or the lies and manipulations and stuff. It might have them showing up to some place. It might have, this is kind of what the theoretics to what that stuff is. And so, usually it's like saying the keyword then gives them a memory of a psychop. Now, with that psychop in an S&M usually involves blackmailing in a certain way. A lot of times, these psychos like to utilize like keywords that make them remember like fear and intimidation. And then there's other people that use a keyword to reminds them of their intellectual, of their lack of ability of explaining. Basically, that's kind of what it is. It reminds them of their lack of ability of explaining why they would have been at some event or something. And it'll come in the form of a keyword. When these things are mixed together, it formulates essentially a split memory psyche. Okay? It does. And then to integrate that stuff, people that do this stuff, they don't create it to be integrated. That takes a wizard, a genius, and that one of the things that I know about this is that first as the wizard, you have to figure out what the fuck they're being, what kind of like, it's like the society stuff. That is this, that's even, yeah, that's this one, the pedo touchers or something. Okay? And so the whole idea is that this event, when they pedo touch inside of this S&M shit, pretty much within 12 hours, somebody holds them down and rapes them into a shock state. That's what happens in satanic S&M. Okay, so they usually do it on a live camera, and that's basically within hours sometimes. Usually somebody pummels in and rapes the fuck out of their poor. So that's essentially what causes a split in the psyche, and then it's reinforced by psych ops and this type of stuff. I mean, it just is. The process that they do is pretty intricate. The the reality is they don't actually know how to do this in these S&Ms. And that breaking down and deprogramming all of these psychops and getting rid of this fear and intimidation and intellectual like inferiority aspects to the victim, that is something that would have that victim essentially becoming like a massive liability to the satanic S&M group as a whole. What that means is that they don't do this because that's what would end up happening. They would end up narking off their own internal pedobang group a lot of the times. And that is why they don't necessarily ever have any procedural methodologies for reintegrations from satanic sex slaving methodology. And so it's funny because the Lumen Court doesn't officially like support like this idea or something, that like they don't believe it's achievable. That is where essentially, it's like that kind of is like what the overall S&M, satanic S&M corporate, it kind of operates in a corporate way. It just does. They have like smaller groups that are part of a bigger whole kind of, and that is like where it's like they still basically won't believe that somebody who went through this would ever be able to achieve reintegration. Well, that's basically it. And so that I noticed that was their official corporate response or something. And it's like that's essentially the corporate response of the overall Satan Corp that runs those dark webs that have people with this type of issue in it. Okay. This Lumen company is essentially what that 50 Gray and Gray is attempting to build a company like that. Basically. And that's just like where an S&M is attempting to build like a company that would be theoretically similar to that, with people that walk in. Basically, they switch memories, and that then their mundane life is isolated too. They also plan on doing secret stuff, and that it's like a theoretical way of when people leave the building or whatever, they won't have any memory of the top secrety stuff that they might be doing. That's what the Satan S&M clubs, they essentially they achieve a similar idea that when they access the dark web that operates the corporation that they're all technically a part of, with that comes some of this severance stuff that switches their memories in ways, and that is what causes them to keep an internal secrecy to it, because basically they just won't remember what they were doing when they were accessing online their interface that pops up on their screen and pipes in a high pitched frequency that causes them to have, there'll be some visual imageries that will be utilized also with it, that essentially triggers them and then kind of splits, changes to a different memory cortex compartment, basically. And so there's real people. I mean, this is like where they are so psychotic nowadays that they like to broadcast how people literally can't recall something 5 minutes after they were talking about it or something. And that's the whole idea, is that they'll be doing something blatantly in front of everyone, and then somebody will like press a button or something like that, and then they won't have any memory of what they were just doing. I mean, that's basically, and that they would have been interacting on like a dark web and shit, and essentially that stuff's all linked to somewhat of an automation, and the pop-up interface activates the sound and different stuff that causes them to be like this TV show people in ways. And that is what the tech brains, that's what, well, I've heard different terms for this stuff, but essentially it all operates in a similar kind of way. And then the tech nerds, they were like doing it willfully and shit, and it was called tech braining people. And essentially, it's this severance method. And see, that's what really like highlighted it, and why I started researching it, because the whole idea is that this older theoretical kind of MK Ultra style method is one of the things that I'm an expert at, and that I spent a large part of my life researching this aspects to the theoretical abuse that causes that type of mental splitting kind of stuff. And so essentially I've isolated down some theoretical ideas that could potentially build towards a real reintegration for a lot of people that suffer from that stuff. But the newer type of tech brain kind of shit, that stuff, that stuff is very hardened, and it is very difficult to reverse and to reintegrate those more. I mean, they just do some really psycho stuff, like real fucking. It's like the older satanic S&M kind of method. I mean, these S&Ms are literally doing like in Clockwork Orange, where they're like holding his eyes open and bombarding him with horrible imageries and stuff. That that type of that's like MK Ultra style versions, and that those are the ones that are very difficult to achieve this with. See, essentially getting them to remember the psychotic, brain splitting moments is what this is. And usually, that not knowing what it is or why it happened, and being afraid of being considered a schizo and being thrown in a psych unit, and the fear of those people and what they were doing and stuff, A lot of times that has a, if they like remember, a lot of times their brain will just it'll rebuild an amnesia just to protect the psyche because of the realization aspects of it. And so then that type of stuff works against this reintegration aspects because it really is achievable. It has been proven. Oh yeah, oh yeah, it's been proven. Oh yeah. The reality is that there's a lot of prostitutes that were basically in satanic S&M clubs that they were being put through this type of stuff, and that the reintegration process is being researched because there's a lot of women that were doing prostitution that ended up getting this type of shit done to them because there's basically satanic S&M clubbers that are real fucking infatuated with doing that memory kind of sex slaving shit to women. So much so that they like convince prostitutes and they pay them a shit ton of money to sex slave them and shit. Because they're like so obsessed with doing that shit that some prostitutes get paid a real shit ton of money to be utilized as a person to be sex slaving into these split memory type of people. And so then essentially there's people that end up finding them and they end up leaving prostitution and then they end up there's people that end up figuring out that they were put through this memory splitting kind of shit. And that is what sparked the need for therapy to reintegrate them, and that process is potentially slow based on fear of blackmails and intimidation by police officers that run a silent scene over prostitutes in those ways, okay? And that is, like I say, they'll have a difficulty intellectually explaining away what they were involved in, okay? And so, like, that gets in the way. So, I mean, essentially, the first phase is just to figure out what their gaslights are and to deprogram those. Once and that is somewhat of a difficult process sometimes because people that are gaslit view that stuff as normal reality a lot of the times, and that is where they won't necessarily know what the gaslight deprogramming needs to see. They won't even know what the gaslight is. It'll just be something that has years of online behavior and stuff went by that they just accept as normal reality. It's kind of like these groups of AA groups that sit around button psycho torturing somebody in speakers and shit. That is a real gaslight and psyop that they suffer from. And see, that type of shit needs to be broken before the keyword aspect gets. And so, I mean, that's like, it's like sound torture, jail.